Welcome to the podcast to preserve, protect, and defend the soul of America.
The topic we shall discuss in today's show, vapor and void, the American vaping epidemic, the FDA's regulatory paralysis, and what the e-cigarette experience reveals about the structural limits of public health governance.
I am Alex.
And I am Sam.
And we are really glad you're joining us today
Mm-hmm.
because we are taking a massive deep dive into a text that is just, honestly, it's mind-blowing.
It really is. The mission for you, the listener, today is to kind of navigate this incredibly complex source material with us. We're looking at how a genuinely well-intentioned tech innovation just spiraled.
Right. It completely spiraled into a public health crisis and, a regulatory meltdown.
Exactly. And a cultural phenomenon, really. Now, we do need to state right up front that this text contains some highly politically charged events, especially later on.
Yeah, very charged. But we want to make it super clear to you that we are not taking sides here.
Right? Zero sides taken. We are strictly unpacking the factual events and the arguments exactly as they are presented in the source material.
Exactly. So to kick this off, I want you to imagine that you are a high school principal.
Yeah.
It's the spring of 2018.
Okay, 2018.
Right. And we are at Marshfield High School, which is down on the south shore of Massachusetts.
Got it.
The principal there, this guy Robert Kother, is literally standing in front of local news cameras. And he's holding a fistful of what look exactly like sleek, brushed aluminum USB flash drives.
Like the ones you'd plug into a laptop.
Yes, exactly like that. And he had spent the entire morning just confiscating them from his students.
Wow. Just taking them away all morning.
Yeah, but the text points out, this was not your standard, catching a couple of rebellious seniors smoking cigarettes behind the bleachers kind of
Right.
thing.
This was different.
Very different.
Yeah.
Kother told the reporters a story that sounded a lot closer to an invasion. I mean, he was confiscating these devices across every single grade level.
So not just the older kids.
No, freshmen, sophomores, seniors, the athletes, the theater kids. It was crossing every single social boundary in the school.
That is wild.
Yeah, and the kids were using them everywhere. In the hallways, hiding them in the back rows of classrooms, and especially the bathrooms.
Oh, the classic high school bathroom.
Right, but the sheer volume of use actually forced teachers to physically lock the bathroom doors during class periods, just to maintain basic order in the building.
That is just incredible. But the most striking detail of that moment, and honestly the central theme of the source text we're analyzing today, is the physical design of those devices.
The way they looked.
Yeah, exactly. Because Kother was holding a product called JUUL.
Right, JUUL.
And if a parent were casually checking their teenager's backpack, just to make sure they had their homework or whatever, they would see that sleek piece of aluminum and make an entirely logical assumption.
That it was just school tech.
Exactly.
Right.
The modern assumption that it's just another piece of necessary technology.
Right.
Because it was completely divorced from the aesthetic history of smoking.
There's no paper, no ash.
Right, and no smell of burning tobacco at all.
It's like the ultimate Trojan horse of consumer tech,
That's a perfect way to describe it.
It completely bypassed the adult radar because aesthetically, it just belonged to the digital age. You could hold it hidden in a closed fist, and you literally plugged it into the USB port of your laptop to charge it. I mean, a teacher walking down the aisle of a computer lab would look right past it.
They wouldn't even blink.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think we really need to look at where that design came from, because as the text notes, this was not cooked up in some shadowy boardroom in Winston-Salem by old-school tobacco executives wearing suits.
Oh, not at all. The lineage here is purely Silicon Valley.
Pure tech bro stuff.
Exactly. JUL was actually born in a Stanford University product design class back in 2004.
Wait, 2004? That early?
Yeah, it took a while to iterate. Two master's students, James Monsies and Adam Bowen, were writing their thesis on how to create a more satisfying, elegant alternative to combustible cigarettes. And they were completely steeped in that classic tech industry disruption mindset. You know the one?
Oh, yeah. Move fast and break things.
Right. The core philosophy of that era of Silicon Valley was this idea that you could simultaneously generate massive profits and, save the world.
Just by making a better gadget.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Simply by replacing a harmful legacy technology with a sleek, engineered alternative.
So they wanted to disrupt the cigarette the exact same way Uber disrupted the taxi industry.
That is the exact parallel, yes.
You could really see that obsessive design focus in the final product. You had this precision machine body, the magnetic pod system, it clicked into place with this incredibly satisfying tactile snap.
Oh, right.
It's very similar to how an Apple product feels, when you connect an iPad to a magnetic keyboard or something. It was actively designed to be coveted.
It was status symbol. But, the aesthetic deception is really only half the story here.
Right.
Because if we want to understand how a product like this managed to roll right through the gates of the American regulatory system and just end up in the hands of millions of teenagers, we have to look at the government.
The structural paralysis of the FDA.
Exactly. We have to unpack the historical baggage of tobacco regulation itself.
Which is a heavy bag.
Very heavy. The text actually refers to this as the original sin of American consumer safety law.
Wow. Original sin.
Yeah, because tobacco has always held this bizarrely protected, almost untouchable status in America. I mean, it was the fundamental cash crop of the Jamestown colony in the 1600s.
Right. It built the early economy.
Exactly. It underpinned the plantation economy. And by the 20th century, it was just woven into the absolute fabric of the mass media advertising economy.
It was everywhere.
Everywhere. So as consumer protection laws modernized throughout the 20th century, governing everything from the seat belts in our cars to the artificial colors in our food.
Tobacco basically got a free pass.
A perpetual hall pass, yeah.
Which leads to a legal moment in the year 2000 that, honestly, it reads like satire.
It really does.
So the FDA, under Commissioner David Kessler, had spent the 1990s waging this really aggressive war against big tobacco. And Kessler's legal gambit was actually brilliant on paper. He argued that nicotine is a drug, and therefore cigarettes are simply drug delivery devices.
Which makes logical sense.
Total sense.
Yeah.
And therefore they should fall entirely under the FDA's jurisdiction. Well, the tobacco industry obviously sued immediately.
Of course they did.
And the case, which was FDA v. Brown and Williamson, went all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And the Supreme Court ruled, in a 5-4 decision, that the FDA did not have the authority to regulate tobacco.
And the underlying logic of that Supreme Court decision, as the source material breaks down, is just a profound paradox.
It makes my head spin.
Right. It shaped the next 2 decades. The court essentially said that because tobacco is so incredibly dangerous, if the FDA were to classify it as a drug, the agency's own statutory mandate would legally require them to ban cigarettes entirely.
Because you can't approve a medicine that kills people.
Exactly. You cannot approve a drug that definitively kills half of its long-term users.
Yeah.
But because Congress clearly did not want a prohibition-style ban on cigarettes.
Because it's too culturally entrenched.
Right. The court reasoned that Congress must never have intended for the FDA to have jurisdiction over tobacco in the first place.
That is just, it's a staggering piece of legal gymnastics.
It really is.
They essentially said to the tobacco companies, you are too dangerous, and therefore we cannot regulate you.
The product was literally protected specifically because its harms were so severe.
It took almost another decade for Congress to fix that ridiculous loophole.
Yeah, in 2009.
Right. In 2009, they passed the Tobacco Control Act.
Yeah.
And this explicitly gave the FDA authority over tobacco products and created the Center for Tobacco Products. Finally, right. But even that landmark law was riddled with these massive concessions to the industry.
Oh, huge concessions.
It basically grandfathered in all existing products on the market as of February 15, 2007.
Right.
So the old deadly combustible cigarettes that were literally killing 480,000 Americans a year were perfectly fine to stay on the shelf.
Just business as usual for Marlboro and Camel?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But any new product introduced after that arbitrary date needed rigorous FDA review.
And that framework immediately collided with the invention of the e-cigarette.
A total head-on collision.
Yeah, because the FDA initially tried to block e-cigarette imports back in 2009 by reverting to Kessler's old argument. They claimed these new vapes were unapproved drug-device combinations.
Trying to classify them as medical devices again.
Right. But the federal court smacked that down in the 2010 Sotera ruling.
Okay.
The court told the FDA that because the nicotine in these e-cigarettes was technically derived from tobacco plants, they had to be regulated as tobacco products under that new 2009 Act.
Not as medical devices.
Exactly. Not as drug device combos.
But here is where the institutional inertia really kicks in. And frankly, I struggle to understand the timeline the text lays out here.
It's frustrating to read.
Super frustrating. So, to regulate e-cigarettes under the Tobacco Control Act, the FDA had to write what is legally called a deeming rule. They had to formally declare, on paper, that e-cigarettes were deemed to be tobacco products. Well, They started drafting that rule in 2011.
Okay, 2011.
It was not finalized until May 2016.
Wow.
5 full years. I mean, if the government had just spent the entire 1990s fighting big tobacco in court, how does it take a literal act of Congress and then 5 solid years of paperwork just to get the legal authority to look at a new nicotine product?
It's a great question, and the source material argues we really have to separate this regulatory paralysis from outright corruption.
So it wasn't bribery.
No, it wasn't that the FDA was getting paid off in back rooms. It was this perfect storm of severe resource constraints, the staggering administrative complexity of modern federal rulemaking, and honestly, the relentless pressure of an industry that knows exactly how to weaponize procedural delays.
It'll just bog the system down.
Exactly. Every draft rule requires endless rounds of notice and comment periods, reviews by the Office of Management and Budget, massive cost-benefit analyses, and preemptive legal defense against the lawsuits they know are coming.
But that 5-year administrative delay, I mean, that was an absolute lifetime in the modern tech era.
Oh, 100%.
It provided the exact window of time JUUL needed to build an empire.
Yep.
They launched in June 2015, a full year before the FDA's deeming rule was even finalized on paper. By the time the regulatory framework officially existed, the product that would define this entire crisis was already fully entrenched in high schools across the country.
They had already won the market.
They had. And it wasn't just the sleek design that kept the kids hooked either.
No, not at all.
The real innovation, the scary part, was the chemistry.
Yes, and I actually think this is the perfect moment to mention the subtitle of the source text, which really frames everything we're discussing today.
Let's hear it.
The full text is subtitled, A Study in Institutional Failure, Youth Addiction, and the Architecture of Corporate Impunity.
Wow, the architecture of corporate impunity, that is a heavy title.
It is, and that architecture is fundamentally built on a chemical breakthrough, nicotine salts.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of that, because this is where that tech disruption narrative really shows its teeth.
It's fascinating science in a dark way.
Yeah. So early e-cigarettes, the ones that were invented over in China in the early 2000s, they used what is called free-base nicotine.
Right.
Now, free-base nicotine is highly alkaline. It has a very high pH level. If you try to inhale a massive concentration of free-base nicotine, it burns your throat horribly.
Oh, it's brutal.
It causes this violent, hacking, coughing fit.
Oh.
So it is inherently self-limiting because the human body actively rejects it at high doses.
Exactly. Your body is saying, stop doing this.
Right. But the founders of JUUL recognized that biological limitation. They realized they needed to deliver a much higher payload of nicotine if they wanted to satisfy heavy, long-term adult smokers.
But they had to make it palatable.
Exactly. So they discovered that if you mix free-base nicotine with an organic acid, specifically benzoic acid, it actually lowers the pH level.
It neutralizes the burn.
Right. It protonates the nicotine molecule, creating a nicotine salt.
And the physiological result of adding that acid is honestly terrifying when you apply it to a teenager.
Oh, totally.
Because a single JUUL pod contained roughly 59 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter.
Which is huge.
It is essentially equivalent to the nicotine payload of an entire pack of combustible cigarettes, just condensed down into a few tiny drops of liquid.
A whole pack in one little pod.
Yes. But because of the benzoic acid you mentioned, it went down perfectly smooth. There was absolutely no harsh throat hit. There was no coughing.
So a naive adolescent brain, someone who had never smoked before, was consuming this massive, highly addictive dose of a chemical, and their body's natural defense mechanisms were entirely bypassed.
Completely bypassed. You are looking at a pharmacological delivery system engineered for maximum efficiency.
It's like hacking the human body.
That's exactly what it is. And the way the company chose to introduce this pharmacological innovation to the public was through their 2015 marketing campaign, which was called Vaporized.
Oh, I remember seeing pictures of this in the source material.
Yeah, the text notes that this campaign is now among the most heavily scrutinized examples of youth-targeted tobacco marketing in American history.
I mean, they didn't exactly use grizzled, older smokers in the ads, did they?
Not at all. If it was a cessation product, you'd expect to see a 50-year-old trying to quit.
Right.
Instead, they hired young, highly attractive models, many in their early 20s, posing in these brightly colored, highly stylized photo shoots. They threw massive launch parties sponsored by Vice magazine.
And they aggressively utilized Instagram.
Oh, heavily.
They were actively paying social media influencers to promote the device online. And the demographics of those influencers' followers heavily skewed under 21.
Very young audience.
Yeah. Now, the public stance from the company for years was always some variation of, we are strictly making a product for adult smokers trying to transition off combustible cigarettes.
That was the corporate line.
Always. But the text outlines the internal documents that were produced later during the North Carolina Attorney General's investigation.
Ah, right, the lawsuits.
Yes. And those internal communications showed that company executives were well aware that a massive portion of their early adopters had never smoked a cigarette in their lives.
They had the data. And the aggressive blurring of lines went way beyond just billboards and Instagram.
What else did they do?
The text documents instances where company representatives actually held school-based presentations.
Wait, in the schools?
Yes. In at least one documented case at a private school, a representative reportedly told students the product was, quote, totally safe, and essentially presented it to them as a harmless tech gadget.
Wow.
They were operating under this guise of youth prevention and harm reduction while actively normalizing the product to underage audiences at the exact same time.
So you have a product that is perfectly designed to bypass adult suspicion, chemically engineered to bypass the body's natural gag reflex, and marketed directly into the digital spaces where teenagers live.
The perfect storm.
It really is. And the corporate giants were obviously watching all this unfold. In December 2018, Altria, which is the parent company of Philip Morris,
The Marlboro guys.
right, the biggest tobacco corporation out there, they swooped in and invested $12.8 billion for a 35% stake in JUUL.
$12.8 billion. That is a staggering number.
It is. Now, I have to ask you a question based on this text. Do we really believe that Altria looked at JUUL and thought, wow, what a great way to help our aging adult smokers quit using our primary product? Or does a $12.8 billion check suggest they knew exactly what demographic JUUL had captured?
Well, the source material leans heavily toward that second interpretation. I mean, Altria possesses decades of internal research on the mechanics of youth initiation.
Right, they wrote the playbook.
They understand better than any entity on Earth that the financial viability of a tobacco company relies entirely on replacing dying smokers with new young nicotine users.
It's a morbid business model, but it's true.
It is. And they saw that JUL had single-handedly cornered a brand new generation of nicotine-naive consumers, and they simply bought their way into the monopoly.
Which makes sense from a ruthless business perspective.
Exactly. And by the time Altria wrote that massive check, the 2018 National Youth Tobacco Survey was already showing that more than 3 million middle and high school students had used e-cigarettes in the past 30 days.
3 million kids.
Right.
Which is what finally triggers the regulatory avalanche at the federal level.
Here we go.
Remember that 2016 deeming rule we talked about earlier? The one that took 5 long years just to write?
Yep, the paperwork nightmare.
Right. Well, it stated that e-cigarette companies eventually had to file what is called a pre-market tobacco product application, or PMTA.
PMTA, right.
And they had to file this to prove to the FDA that keeping their specific products on the market was, quote, appropriate for the protection of public health.
Okay.
But the FDA just kept pushing the deadline for those applications back.
Yeah.
It kept getting delayed.
Because they weren't ready.
Exactly. So finally, a federal judge steps in and forces their hand, and the deadline hits in September 2020. But the FDA wasn't just handed a normal stack of paperwork.
Oh, no.
They were hit with applications for 6.7 million distinct e-cigarette products.
6.7 million. I mean, that number is where the structure of public health governance completely buckled under the weight.
It broke the system.
It did, because you have to remember how the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products is funded. It's funded by user fees paid by the tobacco industry itself.
Which ties their budget to the market share of the companies they are regulating.
Exactly. It's a structural conflict. And by 2021, they had roughly 850 employees to handle this entire crisis.
850 people for nearly 7 million applications.
Right. For context, the pharmaceutical side of the FDA might review a few hundred new drug applications a year, backed by massive, highly standardized clinical trials.
Very clean data.
Very clean. But the tobacco side was staring at millions of applications because the e-cigarette market doesn't work like pharmaceuticals at all.
Right, because every single permutation of a product requires a completely separate application.
Yes.
Like if you make a watermelon vape, that's one application. If you make that same flavor in 3 different nicotine strengths, well, now that's 3 applications.
It multiplies so fast.
It does. And if you put it in a different sized pod, that's another 3. The industry was largely driven by overseas manufacturers who were just pumping out thousands of flavor combinations, iterating at the speed of software updates.
It's an impossible task for a regulator.
It really is. It's like asking a single small-town building inspector to individually review the structural integrity of every single brick in a skyscraper.
While the building is going up.
Yes. While the construction crew is actively laying thousands of new bricks an hour, it is a mathematical impossibility for those 850 employees.
And during the peak of this escalation, from 2017 to roughly 2019, FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb was desperately trying to sound the alarm on this.
He was trying to do something.
He was. He formally declared youth vaping an epidemic.
Yeah.
He initiated these massive enforcement blitzes, sending out thousands of warning letters to retailers.
Right.
He even issued ultimatums to the major manufacturers, giving them 60 days to prove they could keep their products away from minors.
But the core structural failure just remained, right? The products stayed on the shelves.
They never left.
Because the fundamental requirement of pre-market review, which normally means you have to prove your product is safe before you sell it to the public, was entirely inverted here.
Right, they were already selling them.
Companies were selling millions of units every week while the FDA was just drowning in the paperwork of trying to review them post facto.
Exactly.
And when Gottlieb finally stepped down in 2019, the entire regulatory framework basically devolved into a political battleground.
Oh, heavily political.
Yeah. In September 2019, President Trump actually stood in the Oval Office and announced that his administration would pursue a sweeping, comprehensive ban on all flavored e-cigarettes to protect children.
A total ban. But the text details how quickly political triage overrode public health policy in that moment.
It reversed so fast.
Incredibly fast. Within a matter of weeks, industry lobbyists and political advisors just descended on the White House.
What was their argument?
Well, they presented internal polling arguing that a comprehensive flavor ban would alienate a massive block of adult vapers in key swing states. And this was right before the 2020 election.
Ah, so it was electoral math.
Precisely. So by January 2020, the finalized policy was severely watered down. It only banned fruit and mint flavors in closed pod systems like JUUL.
Okay, so JUL got hit.
Yes, but it completely exempted menthol and tobacco flavors across the board. And critically, it entirely exempted the rapidly rising category of disposable e-cigarettes.
Which is a huge loophole.
Massive!
But, while the FDA was being torn apart by these millions of applications and trying to navigate this intense political whiplash, a completely distinct, utterly terrifying medical crisis suddenly hijacked the national narrative.
The summer of 2019.
Right. In the summer of 2019, emergency rooms across the country started admitting teenagers and young adults with these severe, mysterious lung injuries.
And the clinical presentation of these patients was just alarming.
Yeah, the text gets really descriptive here.
It does. Patients were showing up with symptoms mimicking severe pneumonia. We're talking shortness of breath, chest pain, high fever, extreme fatigue.
But it wasn't an infection.
No, their lab work showed absolutely no signs of infectious bacteria or viruses. But when pulmonologists looked at their CT scans, the lungs looked like they had sustained severe chemical burns.
Chemical burns on the inside. That is horrifying.
By September of that year, the CDC had actually activated its Emergency Operations Center to track a condition they eventually named EVALI.
EVALI, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury.
Right, and it ultimately caused 2,807 hospitalizations and 68 deaths across the country.
It was absolute panic. I mean, if you remember the news coverage from that summer, it felt like overnight, vaping went from being this concerning youth addiction issue to a literal acute poison.
People were terrified.
But the epidemiological work to figure out what was actually causing EVALI was incredibly fast and targeted, to their credit.
The scientists moved quickly.
They did. Within a few months, the CDC definitively traced the outbreak. And this is the crucial part. It was not linked to the legal nicotine e-cigarettes like JUL that everyone had been arguing about in Congress.
No, not at all.
It was traced to a specific chemical cutting agent called vitamin E acetate.
And the mechanism of vitamin E acetate is really crucial to understand if you're trying to grasp this crisis.
Walk us through it.
So in the illicit black market cannabis industry, dealers were constantly trying to stretch their supply of THC oil to increase their profit margin.
Make the supply go further.
Exactly. And they discovered that vitamin E acetate has the exact same viscosity and color as high-grade THC oil. It was the perfect diluent to cut the product with.
I see.
But here's the fatal flaw. While vitamin E is perfectly safe to swallow in a daily vitamin pill or, apply topically as a skin lotion.
Sure, people use it all the time.
Right. Inhaling it is entirely different. When it is vaporized and inhaled, that heavy oil coats the alveoli.
The little air sacs.
Yes, the tiny air sacs in the lungs where oxygen exchange actually happens. So it essentially suffocates the lung tissue from the inside out, causing massive inflammation and fluid buildup.
So it's basically drowning in oil.
Essentially, yes.
But vitamin E acetate was fundamentally incompatible with nicotine e-liquids, right? It wasn't found in the legal nicotine products sold at licensed retailers.
No, they didn't use it.
Yet, the public communication around this crisis was just an unmitigated disaster.
Oh, it was a mess.
The media, the public health agencies, and even the acronym EVIL-I itself, they just kept using the umbrella phrase vaping illness.
They didn't specify.
They completely conflated the illegal cannabis black market with the legal commercial nicotine market.
And the source material argues that this failure of precision in public messaging caused severe collateral damage.
Because words matter.
They really do. When a public health agency blanketly declares vaping kills without specifying which specific chemical in which specific type of vape is causing the acute deaths, the public draws the wrong conclusions. The text notes that this ambiguity actually caused a measurable panic among adult e-cigarette users. It drove many of them to abandon their nicotine vapes and return to combustible cigarettes.
Wow. They went back to smoking.
Yes, a product that we know with absolute scientific certainty causes cancer and long-term mortality.
Now, if you're listening, the text is very careful to clarify that nicotine vaping is not harmless.
No, definitely not harmless.
It has actual documented health risks.
Yeah.
But those risks are chronic, not acute. We're talking about the long-term exposure to heavy metals leaching from the cheap heating coils in these devices.
Right.
Or the inhalation of aldehydes, like formaldehyde, when the e-liquid is heated to an overly high temperature.
Which is very bad over a decade.
Very bad. And of course, the profound, still unfolding effects of high-dose nicotine on the neural pathways of a developing adolescent brain.
Also terrible.
But those are fundamentally different threats than the acute, immediate lipid pneumonia of EVALE.
They're completely different categories of risk. And this intense media chaos, this absolute conflation of THC black markets and nicotine regulation, it provided a massive smokescreen for the industry.
A distraction.
Exactly. It allowed the e-cigarette industry to essentially tie the FDA up in federal court for years while the public was looking the other way at EVAL-I.
The legal roller coaster.
Right. Let's look at the timeline here. Fast forward to June 2022. The FDA finally wades through the paperwork and issues a marketing denial order for JUUL.
In MDO.
Yes. They effectively ruled that JUUL had failed the PMTA process, citing insufficient data regarding the toxicological profile of their specific e-liquids.
Okay.
And they ordered them to remove all products from the American market immediately.
Which sounds huge, right?
Yeah.
But if you know anything about corporate litigation, you know that was just the opening bell of a massive legal fight.
Oh, it was just day one.
Within 2 days, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals issued an emergency stay. They immediately blocked the FDA's order. 2 days. And then surprisingly, the FDA actually stayed their own order shortly after that.
Wait, they blocked themselves?
Yes. They cited a need to conduct further review of JUL's data, mainly because there was intense internal and external criticism of how they conducted their review process.
Wow.
The industry was just executing the exact same playbook Big Tobacco perfected back in the late 20th century.
Weaponize the procedure?
Exactly. Exploit any hint of scientific uncertainty and delay federal regulation to keep your highly profitable product on the shelves while you fight a war of attrition in court.
And the courts in certain jurisdictions were highly receptive to these industry challenges.
Oh, very receptive.
We see this vividly in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a jurisdiction that covers states like Texas and Louisiana, which historically have a very heavy tobacco industry presence.
Right, tobacco country.
The Fifth Circuit began issuing stays for thousands of e-cigarette products, and their legal argument was honestly fascinating.
What did they argue?
They accused the FDA of executing a regulatory switcheroo.
A switcheroo. That's the legal term.
Yes. The court claimed the FDA had initially signaled to smaller manufacturers that they did not need expensive, long-term clinical trials to prove their flavored vapes helped adults quit smoking.
Okay.
But then, according to the court, the FDA retroactively denied their applications for lacking that exact type of clinical evidence.
So it's like a referee just abruptly changing the rules of the game in the fourth quarter.
Exactly. Or at least that was the narrative the industry pushed and the court agreed with.
But then we hit a massive truly unexpected legal reversal in 2025.
The Supreme Court steps in.
Right. The Supreme Court took up the case, FDA v. Wages, and White Lion Investments. And in a unanimous opinion, unanimous written by Justice Samuel Alito, the court emphatically upheld the FDA's authority.
Unanimous is rare for this court.
Very rare. Alito wrote that the FDA was entirely justified and acted neither arbitrarily nor capriciously in denying over 1 million applications for flavored e-liquids. The core reasoning was incredibly simple. The companies completely failed to provide adequate evidence that their candy and fruit flavors offered a substantial enough benefit to adult smokers to outweigh the known, overwhelming appeal those flavors have to underage youth.
And you know, the broader context of that ruling makes it even more striking if you follow legal track.
How so?
Because this decision came down during a period when the Supreme Court was actively and aggressively dismantling the power of the federal administrative state in almost every other sector.
Oh, right, rolling back the Chevron deference.
Exactly. They were stripping power from agencies left and right. Yet when it came to tobacco and the FDA, they granted the agency a monumental victory.
Which is fascinating.
It is. However, the source text points out the tragic, inherent irony of this whole situation.
The timing.
Right. The FDA won the ultimate courtroom battle, but they lost the market reality. The years of legal delay had already accomplished everything the industry needed them to.
Because the delay was the actual product. By the time the legal dust actually settled, JUUL ended up receiving authorization from the FDA for its tobacco and menthol flavors in July 2025. They had to submit over 100 new scientific studies to get it.
Right.
But the financial carnage was already complete. Remember Altria's massive $12.8 billion investment from 2018.
They talked about earlier.
Yeah. They had to write off 98% of it.
98%.
They eventually traded the remaining stake, which was valued at a measly $250 million, for some heated tobacco intellectual property that was so functionally immaterial they didn't even bother listing it on their balance sheet.
That's just wild.
It really stands as one of the most catastrophic corporate investments of our time.
But the true tragedy, as the text outlines, is that by the time the FDA and the federal courts finally managed to wrangle JUUL into submission, the youth market had completely moved on anyway.
They weren't even using JUUL anymore.
No, we enter what the text calls the second wave, the era of the disposables.
All right.
If you want a metaphor for modern regulatory failure, the text says it is the Hydra, from mythology.
Cut off one head, 2 more grow back.
Exactly. The FDA spent a half-decade meticulously severing the head of JUUL in court, and 100 brightly colored, untraceable, disposable Chinese heads grew in its place basically overnight.
Let's talk about the mechanics of these disposables, because they really changed the game.
Completely.
We are talking about products like Puff Bar and later Elf Bar and Geek Bar. They completely dominated the new landscape.
And they are different from JUUL.
Very different. Unlike JUUL, there are no pods to buy a refill. There's no charger you plug into your laptop.
Right.
They are fully self-contained, single-use devices. They come preloaded with thousands of puffs of synthetic nicotine, and they are priced incredibly cheaply, usually just between $10 and $25.
Pocket change for a high schooler.
Exactly. And they come in hundreds of flavors. Watermelon ice, blue raz, strawberry cheesecake.
All the stuff that appeals to kids.
Yes. And here is the brutal regulatory punchline to all this. Because they were fully disposable devices, they neatly and legally sidestepped the FDA's 2020 flavor restrictions.
Wait, really?
Yes, because that Trump-era restriction had been explicitly written to only apply to closed pod systems like JUUL.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so the disposables were totally exempt.
The scale of the disposable market is genuinely mind-numbing when you look at the data. When the FDA tried to catch up to this new wave, they were hit with over 26 million PMTA applications just for these types of devices.
26 million.
Yeah, and the vast majority of them are manufactured in a massive industrial hub in Shenzhen, China.
Right.
And the distribution model entirely bypassed traditional convenience stores or gas stations.
So how are they getting them?
Teenagers were utilizing TikTok and Instagram to communicate directly with overseas distributors. They would buy these devices in bulk and then run highly lucrative peer-to-peer sales networks right inside the hallways of their high schools.
They basically became mini cartel bosses in their homeroom.
Essentially, yes. The federal government was completely outmatched by the speed of it, The FDA tried to fight back at the border, obviously.
Issue that import alert, right?
Yeah, Import Alert 6641. This gave customs agents the authority to physically seize unauthorized vapes arriving from China at the ports.
Okay, so that should work.
You'd think so, but the text describes it as an endless, unwinnable game of whack-a-mole.
How so?
Because if customs seized a massive shipment of, say, Elf bars, the manufacturer over in Shenzhen would simply change the printing on the box to Design.
Oh, wow.
They'd alter the LLC name on the shipping manifest, pack them up, and put them right back on the next cargo ship.
Just a slight branding tweak and it gets through.
Exactly. It wasn't until 2026 that Congress finally appropriated around $200 million to create a joint federal task force specifically designed to start seizing these shipments in massive, coordinated, multi-agency sweeps.
Which is so late in the game. And because the federal government was paralyzed for so long by lawsuits and paperwork loopholes, the states were basically forced to step in to protect their own public health infrastructure.
They had to fend for themselves.
They did. It is a perfect modern illustration of Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis's famous concept, the idea of states serving as laboratories of democracy.
Right. When the feds fail, the states experiment.
Exactly. When the federal apparatus completely fails, the states start experimenting with their own legislation. For example, in 2022, California voters passed Proposition 31.
I remember that ballot initiative.
Yeah, it was a massive initiative that completely banned the retail sale of most flavored tobacco and vaping products in the state. And the tobacco industry spent tens of millions of dollars trying to defeat it at the ballot box.
But they lost.
They lost heavily.
Yeah.
California voters passed it.
And the resulting patchwork of state laws across the country is just incredibly complex and totally fractured now.
It's a mess.
It really is. Massachusetts went even further than California and just banned all flavored tobacco products, period, including menthol combustible cigarettes.
Wow, even cigarettes.
Yeah. Meanwhile, other states like Florida and Virginia tried a more administrative approach. They created strict state-level product registries.
What does that mean in practice?
It mandates that only vapes that have officially received a federal marketing order from the FDA could be legally sold within their state lines.
Ah, tying it back to the federal approval.
Exactly. But Texas took a completely radical geopolitical route. They passed a law, effective in 2025, that outright banned the retail sale of any vaping device manufactured in China.
Whoa. Just a blanket ban on Chinese vape?
Yes, effectively tying state-level public health policy directly to national security and international trade anxieties.
That is fascinating. But, beyond the mechanics of the devices and the legal loopholes and the wild state legislation, we really have to look at the people actually using these products.
The human element.
Right. Because vaping became this massive, undeniable youth identity marker.
Very quickly.
Yeah. For generations, combustible cigarettes were the ultimate symbol of teenage rebellion, right? The leather jacket and a cigarette.
Classic Americana.
But cigarettes eventually lost their cool factor. They became heavily associated with sickness, cancer, and aging.
Not cool anymore.
Right. Vaping basically replaced that rebellion with a very clean, tech aspirational aesthetic. And the text points out that there are deep, truly troubling demographic rifts in how these products are marketed and consumed.
Yes, the demographics were just impossible to ignore here. Menthol, for example.
Let's talk about menthol.
Menthol has historically been disproportionately marketed directly to Black communities by the tobacco industry for literally decades.
It's a well-documented history.
Very well documented. And the marketing data for menthol e-cigarettes completely mirrors that historical targeting pattern.
They just ported it over to the new tech.
Exactly. Furthermore, the data shows that LGBTQ plus youth exhibit significantly higher rates of vaping compared to their peers.
Really?
Yes, which again reflects historical documented targeting by the tobacco industry. They historically sought to exploit marginalized communities under this false guise of rebellion and inclusion.
That's incredibly predatory.
It is. The cultural meaning of the device is entirely constructed by the massive marketing dollars behind it.
Which brings us to what I personally consider the most agonizing, intractable dilemma in this entire source text.
The big question.
The fundamental tension between harm reduction for addicted adults and the protection of youth.
Right.
To understand how polarizing this is, we really have to look overseas for a second. The United Kingdom model approaches this from a strict harm reduction philosophy.
Very different from the U.S.
Very. Public Health England heavily endorses e-cigarettes. They unequivocally state that they are significantly less harmful than combustible cigarettes. They actively integrate vapes into their national healthcare system to help adult smokers switch.
They prescribe them, basically.
Yes, but contrast that with the Australian model. Australia essentially viewed e-cigarettes as a poison from day one.
Complete lockdown.
Right. They made nicotine vapes prescription only, meaning you literally had to consult a doctor and have it dispensed by a pharmacist.
Wow.
The intended result was strict medical control. But the actual result, massive bureaucratic bottlenecks, exorbitant prices, and the immediate creation of a sprawling, violent black market that now supplies up to 90% of all the vapes consumed in the country.
90%.
90%. Strict prohibition simply shifted the supply chain to unregulated underground syndicates.
And, the medical science regarding harm reduction is actually really crystallizing right now. The text cites the 2024 Cochrane Review.
Explain what that is for the listeners.
For context, if you aren't familiar, the Cochrane Review is widely considered the absolute apex of medical evidence synthesis.
The gold standard.
Yes. They comprehensively analyze all available high-quality clinical trials to definitively determine if a medical intervention actually works.
Okay, what did they find?
The 2024 review strongly validated that nicotine e-cigarettes are highly effective tools for smoking cessation. They actually outperform traditional nicotine replacement therapies like the patch or the gum.
Okay, so I have to pause here and ask the really difficult moral math question.
It's a tough one.
It is. If the highest level of medical evidence on Earth proves that a flavored e-cigarette works significantly better than a standard nicotine patch in helping a 40-year-old two-pack-a-day smoker save their own life from lung cancer.
Which the data says it does.
Right. Isn't there a profound moral obligation to make that product widely accessible in a free market?
Even with the risks.
Yes, even if we know that widespread accessibility inevitably carries a statistical risk of initiating teenagers into nicotine addiction. Like, are we as a society willing to trade adult lives for youth prevention?
That exact moral and scientific tension, that brutal zero-sum game between adult cessation and youth initiation, that is exactly what fueled the explosive political events of 2025 and 2026 that the text covers at the end.
It all came to a head.
It did. And the text also emphasizes a massive confounding variable in this math called dual use.
Oh, right. Dual use.
The harm reduction argument only works if the adult smoker actually stops smoking combustible cigarettes. But data shows a massive percentage of adults become dual users.
They use both.
Yes. They vape in the office or in their car where smoking is banned, but they still smoke combustible cigarettes at home or at the bar.
Which completely negates the cardiovascular benefits of switching.
Entirely. And simultaneously, a third wave of products arrive to complicate the landscape even further. Oral nicotine pouches like Zyn.
Oh, Zyn, you see those everywhere now.
Everywhere. And they saw their youth usage rates double between 2021 and 2025 because they're entirely discreet.
No smoke.
Right. A kid can use them in a classroom without exhaling any vapor at all.
So all of this underlying tension finally just snaps in 2025.
The breaking point.
Yes. And if you are listening, before we dive into this timeline, remember our pledge at the very top of the show. We are strictly and impartially reporting the events and arguments exactly as they are detailed in the source material.
We are just the messengers.
We are examining the structural mechanics here. We are not taking political sides. So in January 2025, Brian King, who was the director of the FDA Center for Tobacco Products, authorized the sale of several Zyn pouch products.
Oh, okay.
He cited data showing that they posed a significantly lower risk than cigarettes.
Which aligns with harm reduction.
Right. But the political landscape shifted dramatically shortly after that. By April 2025, the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., instituted a massive reduction in force within the department.
A huge personnel sweep.
Massive. Brian King was summarily removed from his post, and the career scientific staff regulating tobacco was essentially gutted.
Wow. And the climax of this political intervention occurred the following year, in May 2026.
What?
The FDA did something entirely unprecedented in its history. Under direct pressure from President Trump, the agency officially authorized glass brand e-cigarettes in specific fruit flavors, specifically mango and blueberry.
Good flavors.
Yes, this was the first authorization of a fruit-flavored e-cigarette ever granted in American history.
That is a massive reversal.
Huge. And exactly 1 week after that authorization was announced, FDA Commissioner Marty Makary formally resigned.
He stepped down over this.
He did. According to the text, he reportedly refused to have his professional medical legacy associated with a political decision that he believed would definitively increase youth vaping rates.
The source text really requires us to carefully look at the arguments laid out on both sides of this political earthquake.
Yes, we need to balance this.
Exactly. So let's outline the case for the reversal and the authorization of fruit flavors first.
Okay, the pro-authorization argument.
Right. Proponents of the move point directly to the data from the Cochrane review we just discussed. They argue that adult smokers legitimately prefer fruit flavors over tobacco flavors when they are actively trying to quit.
Which makes sense. You want to get away from the taste of tobacco.
Exactly. And therefore, they argue, restricting flavors actively kills adults who would otherwise quit. They point to the disastrous, unregulated black market in Australia as undeniable proof that overregulation and prohibition completely fail.
The cartel argument.
Right. And crucially, they make a structural democratic argument. They argue that when it comes to complex societal value trade-offs, like balancing adult freedom against youth risk, those decisions should be made by elected officials who are directly accountable to voters, not insulated career bureaucrats in a federal agency.
Right, that's a very clear philosophical stance. Conversely, the text lays out the case against the reversal with equal analytical weight.
Let's hear the counter-argument.
Opponents point squarely to the 2026 National Youth Tobacco Survey. That data showed that despite all the enforcement efforts, fruit remains the absolute top flavor choice for underage youth initiating nicotine use.
Kids like mango and blueberry.
They really do. Opponents argue that dismantling the FDA's enforcement infrastructure and removing career scientists at the exact moment you legally authorize highly appealing fruit flavors is a recipe for a massive resurgence in youth addiction.
It's opening the floodgates.
Exactly. Furthermore, they point to the alarming political override of agency scientists, which, remember, culminated in the resignation of a sitting FDA commissioner as glaring evidence of regulatory capture.
Okay.
They argue it demonstrates how direct political pressure can completely compromise the independent scientific integrity of our public health institutions.
You know, when you look at the entirety of this timeline we've just gone through, it really feels like the FDA is trapped in what we could call the medicalization paradox.
And the medicalization paradox, yeah.
Because we as a society just do not know if we should regulate these devices as strictly controlled pharmaceutical medicines designed to cure a disease, or if we should regulate them as free market consumer vices like alcohol, intended for adult recreation.
We haven't decided what they are.
Exactly. And because the statutory law cannot decide what categorical box they belong in, the entire issue just becomes a political football.
Right.
It just keeps getting punted back and forth across different presidential administrations depending on who is in power.
And that categorical uncertainty has plagued the regulatory framework since the Tobacco Control Act was signed way back in 2009.
It's the original flaw.
It is the core structural limit of the governance we've been discussing today. If you treat e-cigarettes strictly as medicines, you have to require prescriptions and massive clinical trials.
Which severely restricts access for the millions of adult smokers who desperately need them to quit.
Right. But on the flip side, if you treat them as standard consumer goods, you get the JUUL epidemic and the disposable way of targeting kids.
You get the Wild West.
Exactly. So the source text suggests that what is actually needed to resolve this is the creation of a third, completely distinct regulatory category.
Like a middle ground.
Yeah, a consumer nicotine product framework. One that enforces strict manufacturing safety standards, definitively caps nicotine concentrations, and heavily restricts marketing and packaging calibrated to youth risk.
But without the impossible burden of clinical trials.
Precisely. Without requiring the billion-dollar clinical trial evidence of a pharmaceutical drug, but establishing that third category would require a functional, consensus-driven act of Congress, and which, in the current political climate, remains deeply, deeply unlikely.
Yeah, I won't hold my breath for that. So after analyzing the absolute wreckage of the last decade, I mean, the billions of dollars, the millions of documents, the lawsuits, the medical crises, where does the public health landscape actually stand today? How does the text frame the epilogue?
Well, the statistics from the end of 2025 present a genuinely complex, multifaceted picture.
Give us the good news first.
The headline number is very positive. Youth vaping dropped to 5.2%.
Wow, that is a huge drop.
It is a historic low. It represents a massive public health achievement driven by relentless advocates, those state-level bans we talked about, and eventual, albeit severely delayed, federal enforcement.
That's great. But there's a but, isn't there?
There is a dark caveat beneath that number. The epidemiological data shows that the young people who are still vaping, that 5.2%, they are using the devices much more intensely than previous cohorts.
Because of the high nicotine salts in the disposable.
Exactly, driven by those massive payloads. Furthermore, the use of oral nicotine pouches among youth is actively doubling.
So they just shifted to Zen.
Basically. Ultimately, the massive gap between what is cleanly authorized by the law and the chaotic reality of the black market remains vast and totally unresolved.
Which means this massive societal experiment is still running in real time right now.
It is happening as we speak.
And, listener, it is time for the big reveal. We have spent this entire deep dive unpacking a staggering amount of corporate history, chemical science, and federal policy.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We really did. But all of this information, this entire intricate discussion, was derived from a single, truly remarkable source.
It is an incredible piece of work.
It comes from the second book of an expansive 30-volume series. The series is called To Preserve, Protect, and Defend the Soul of America.
Right.
The specific book we explored today is titled Volume 2, Fentanyl Nation, Inside America's Opioid Catastrophe, and the author is Subi Howell.
The sheer depth of research in this book is truly astounding. The author manages to weave together these dense threads of corporate behavioral psychology, the arcane mechanics of regulatory structure, and ground-level public health outcomes in ways that are just rarely synthesized so effectively.
It's masterful.
It really is. It is an absolutely essential text for anyone trying to understand exactly how modern, technologically driven crises unfold within our very rigid legal frameworks. And the great news is that the book is now available in all Amazon bookstores across the world.
Yes, I highly, highly encourage you to go check out the book, buy a copy, dive into the other chapters, and please leave comments and feedback for the author.
Definitely leave a review.
It is exactly the kind of rigorous, challenging work that demands to be read, debated, and discussed by the public.
It really does, because the text forces us to confront the structural limits of how we govern ourselves when our slow, deliberate institutions are faced with rapidly iterating technology and deeply entrenched, highly motivated commercial interests.
It's a fundamental modern conflict. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we have unpacked today.
Okay, let's hear it.
As we get better and better at engineering perfectly clean, aesthetically beautiful, completely frictionless ways to deliver addictive chemicals into the human bloodstream. Whether it is a beautifully machined aluminum flash drive or a discreet little white pouch that sits silently against your gum, we really have to ask ourselves a hard question.
What was the question?
Are we actually solving a public health crisis, or are we simply using technology to make human dependency more convenient?